Welcome, friends of the Greasy Shop Rag. Today we're going to take a look at a McCulloch Pro Mac 700 chainsaw. Customer complaint is that it's got a fuel leak. Now I'm not really sure what kind of fuel leak it's got. If it's a carburetor, fuel line, a fuel tank, fuel cap. So let's dig into this a little bit. First thing I do is look into the tank and I notice that it's completely empty. We have this old wad of felt kind of fuel filter in a rubber cup. We're going to remove that big wad of felt and put our pressure tester in here and put 10 pounds of pressure on this fuel line and see if it holds. So it does look like it's holding pressure. So the fuel line isn't compromised, but it doesn't really feel good. The rubber feels like it's getting old. We're just going to push that wad of felt back in there for now. We'll be coming back to that. Let's take a look underneath the hood here and see what we got going on. Yeah, it's due. So this chainsaw belongs to Bert of Berts Custom Cuts YouTube channel. And he wants to start running this saw on the channel. So we're going to go through it a little bit here and make sure it's good to go. Before I go any further though, I want to look into the cylinder and make sure it's not scored. Yeah, so if you're into wood cutting, wood yard videos, tree cutting, check out Bert's channel. Berts Custom Cuts. So the spark plug looked okay, but we can't really easily look into the cylinder, so we're going to use our scope. And I mean, it's an older saw. You're going to see some wear, but this thing looks pretty good. Now we're going to check for spark and see how strong that ignition system is. Now if you have a tester like this, you want to set it for a 6mm gap. And if the spark jumps that 6mm, then you know you got a pretty decent ignition coil. I know you can't see that very well, but it had good strong spark. So we'll push the plug back in there, tighten her down, and move on. So because of the rubber fuel line feeling kind of old, and the air filter looking like, I gotta stop for a second. That throttle linkage there and the choke linkage, there's like a rubber band in between the two rods. That's what I was pointing at there. And it keeps them from vibrating, keeps them onto the carburetor. It's a pretty neat design. So again, that fuel line didn't feel very good. I didn't like that. The air filter had been on there for a while. So I'm not so sure if anyone has been in this carburetor recently or if ever. I don't know. And I know he wants to start using the saw. So we're going to put a kit in it. You know, this cover is stuck down pretty good. I don't think anyone's been in here in a long time. The metering diaphragm does feel okay. The saw would have ran with it like this, but it's not ideal. I don't know how much longer it would have lasted. It's not that it's necessarily brittle or anything like that. It doesn't make any noise, but it's just stiff. So let's take a look at the fuel pump side. the fuel, this, you know, if you're paying attention here, you know, most carburetors have a pump gasket and a gasket on the cover. Well, there's 3 gaskets in here. There's one extra, that tan one on the left there. I'm not sure what they call it, but it kind of backs up the reeds on the first gasket. So right now I am bottoming the high and low speed needles, just counting the turns in, because I want to pull them out, but when I put it back together I want to put them back in the same spot. You know, a lot of times someone will get a saw and it won't run right, and the first thing they want to do is adjust the carburetor. But you know, if the thing's been running with those carburetor adjustments for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, well, I think there's probably something else maybe that's the problem if it's all of a sudden not running right. So adjusting a carburetor might cure a symptom, but it's not fixing the problem. So here we're removing the pump diaphragm, and it felt like the fuel line. It felt kind of old, not pliable. Now we're going to remove the needle and metering lever. The older I get, the smaller these parts feel. So the needle itself looks kind of wonky. I don't think you can tell in the picture very well, but there's some coating on the needle, something, I don't know what. We're not going to reuse that anyway. It's going to get a new needle. But now that we have it stripped down, it could either go in the ultrasonic cleaner or we could just blow it out with some carb cleaner, and that's what we're going to do on this one. Here's our micro screen. It's in good shape, but there was a new one in the kit, so we'll put it in. You just lay it over the top of where it's got to go, and then you find something about the same diameter and push it in there. I got the official tool here if I can find it. There we go. So here's our fuel pump. And then there's this support gasket that backs up the reeds, I guess. And then on top of the cover I have the regular paper gasket. And then we'll screw this all together. Tighten it down by hand. And now we will look at putting together the needle. Here's the spring. And where's the needle? Just off camera, I guess. The heck's he doing up there? There we go. What we've done is we installed the needle in the end of the metering lever. We put the rod in through the metering lever, dropped it all down into place, and then we snugged down the screw. Taking a look at our metering lever height, and now our gasket. The gasket is not symmetrical. There is a locating pin in one spot. The same with the metering diaphragm and the cover. And we'll get that screwed down into place. Alright, now we're going to put the carburetor back on the saw. We'll install our high and low speed needles, gently bottom them, and then back them out the number of turns that we counted when we took it apart. And through the magic of editing, we have the carb bolted down, all the linkage attached, ready to go. So let's put some fuel in here. Maybe we'll get to start it up and see what it sounds like. Well, right away I'm seeing a problem. There's not supposed to be a puddle of fuel laying next to the carburetor. And I'm starting to think when they said it had a fuel leak, they weren't just a kidding. So on this style of chainsaw, and I don't love it or hate it. I mean, maintenance is easy, but you know, obviously they can leak. I'll show you what's going on here. The tank itself is actually two pieces, two halves. There's a seam like halfway up through the tank. And right there where my finger is where the seam is. And you can see it's leaking. I mean, if the fuel level was below the seam, it wouldn't leak, right? So let me take this apart and show you. It's really a simple design. And it does allow access to the tank if you need to clean it out or service it. So you get 3 screws, and there is a bushing underneath the screw I'm turning now. You'll see that in just a minute. So there's the top half of our fuel tank, and the bottom half is still part of the saw. And that gasket on the top half is our problem. And there's also this gasket back here. This kind of just seals off the around the, below the air filter. I couldn't source a new gasket for that side. You'll see what we do here later to fix that. But I did get a kit that came with a new fuel line. So that makes me happy because I really just didn't like the way that other one felt. And this is the filter that came with the kit, but you know what? This is a big dog. We want to let it eat. We're going to put a little bit bigger filter on here just to make sure it doesn't starve. Oh, I like that. Here's our old gasket. It's a cork material, I believe. Probably the original one. It's coming off of there pretty decent. As soon as I tried to pull it, it broke. When I just was pushing it with the tool there, it was coming apart. I mean, that came off really nice. The paint is all still there. Here's our new, oh, this isn't cork. This is Vitron or something like that. Finding parts for this saw, they're still available, but not everything's still available. So I'm going to take the handle off because I don't know if it's bent or if it's built this way, but it kind of touches the side of the top half of the fuel tank. And when I put this back together, I just don't need anything in my way. I'm just taking a little bit of alcohol here and cleaning up all the mating surfaces. So on this side, I'm just going to put some clear silicone I couldn't find a gasket for this. And all this is doing is keeping dirt out. So if the filter's dirty, it's not going to suck past this seam here of the cover and allow dirt in by the carburetor. And it's just clear silicone. If someone pulls this back apart, it can be re-siliconed. There's a little bit of a spring right there for, I don't know, it's for the operator presence or for the trigger. I just had to lift that up out of the way and get it on top of the cover. So I'm just putting this long screw in here without the bushing temporarily, just to hold it in place. I mean, on the wet side of the fuel tank, we just have that seal, and there's no gasket sealer on it or Permatex or nothing. On the air filter side, I've got the Permatex, and I don't want that wiggling all over the place before I get the screws in there. So we got to find the screws and put them back in. We'll get these snugged down a little bit. Then we're going to backtrack and put the bushing in the tank and run the bolt through it. And this bushing is pretty important because if you didn't have it in there, you'd be able to just keep cranking that cover on until you cracked it or wrecked it. So this way, at least you can just turn it tight onto the bushing, and that's what you get. We're going to treat it to a new air filter and screw the cover down. And we're going to put our handle back on. And now we're going to put fuel in it. Now this scene here is, I don't know, I'd say a couple days after the last scene. And the reason for that is I put Loctite on that center screw of the fuel tank. And I wanted it to dry before I put fuel in here. So now we can go back and see if our gasket is holding or not. We'll get our handy dandy flashlight out. And there, the leak there is all sealed up. We can look around the outside edges of the tank and make sure it's not leaking. And the saw probably sat for a week before they came and picked it up, and it didn't have any leaks, so we're happy with that repair. So that's all I'm going to have for you on Berts Pro Mac 700 chainsaw. Thanks for watching. Later.